Our keynote speaker for this afternoon session is Ted Celeste. Ted is a former Ohio State representative, and he's currently Director of State Programs at the National Institute for Civil Discourse. And he leads Next Generation, a program of NICD. His goal is to inspire and support state legislators who want to promote greater understanding and better decision making. As part of a bipartisan team, he has facilitated trainings for the CSG Midwest Regional Conference and the Arizona, Colorado, Georgia, Idaho, Maine, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Nebraska, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Vermont, and Washington legislatures. Please welcome Mr. Ted Celeste to the stage.
Thanks for joining. Appreciate it. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Is this microphone on? Is this microphone on? Good. So I may be here and I may mosey. Hope that's okay with you guys with the camera. Let me first of all thank Stuart for putting this together. To send my greetings from Carolyn Lukensmeyer, who's the director of the National Institute for Civil Discourse, who she could have been here, but she had some other commitments. And also to say shout out to John Steiner for all the good work he does and the work that we've done together. I appreciate that. What I would like to do today with those of you who are here through this heat, and I totally understand that, is to give you a little bit of background on why I'm here, standing here today, talking about changing the culture of the partisanship and political dysfunction right now. What got me to this point? Why I am so committed to civil discourse and why it's so important to me. And to also tell you about the National Institute for Civil Discourse, which I am blessed to be a part of. You know, it was a joy coming up here, Stuart. I drove from Columbus up 71, and I've made that trip many times. I was thinking back, I went to school at the College of Worcester, and my family lived up in Cleveland, so I'd come visit them coming up to from on that 71 highway. I also, when I graduated from the College of Worcester, joined the Teacher Corps. And while in the Teacher Corps, I was a teacher, a trainee at Addison Junior High, which doesn't exist anymore, but you know about it, 79th and Huff. And I made that trip from Worcester up to Cleveland to go to that school in the late 60s, actually 1968. The sad thing about it, if you think back about it, and you think where we are today, not a heck of a lot has changed. This feels a lot like the 60s to me. Now, I was blessed. I come from a political family. My dad was elected mayor of Lakewood, the suburb on the west side of Cleveland, when I was in the 4th grade. And I thought this was great because the day after his election, I went to school and the kids all came around the building and they grabbed me and put me up on their shoulders. You know, I thought, hey, this is cool. Is this what politics is all about? It's like I'd been elected. Well, from 4th grade until I graduated from high school, he was mayor. Everything I did, whether I got a part in a play or I got an A, it was because he was the mayor. So it changed the perception of it. But what we did was talk about political life at the dinner table. First of all, we ate at the dinner table every night. Something new and unique that doesn't happen a lot in our society today. And we talked about the importance of relating one to another. But one of the gifts that my dad gave me was the importance of this concept of finding common ground. When he took office as mayor of Lakewood, he was a Democrat. Lakewood was very Republican, had not had a Democratic mayor for all of history practically. He walked into the office and all the present employees came in and submitted their resignations. He said, "What are these for? Aren't you doing your job?" And they said, well, yes. He said, I tell you what, I'm going to put them in my desk drawer, and if there's a reason to bring them back out, I'll give you a call. Some of the best people in his administration were those who were kept on as Republicans. It was a big lesson on working across the aisle, what a difference it makes to view people as people, not as a D or an R. And so that was an early introduction for me, and one which I carried on throughout my political life. Another thing that happened while he was mayor, again, remember this is early 60s, the then new president, Jack Kennedy, came through town. And I don't know whether anybody remembers this. He came through Lakewood, and I got a chance to meet him. It was made a phenomenal impression on me, and I carried that story of his through my lifetime, and the importance of doing something for other folks. Indeed, my wife and I went to the Peace Corps as a result of that experience. And so I really, really felt that he also imbued that spirit of looking at people as people and not as Democrats and Republicans, and it had a powerful impact on me. So then I'm off. I mentioned that I went to the College of Worcester right after I graduated from Lakewood, 1963, freshman year at Worcester. Again, just thinking back, it took me aback as I was driving up here. We're reading and seeing all of this violence going on, and there I was, a freshman at Worcester, really young, first time I'd really been away like that, and as I was walking to my introductory class, Lib Studies it was called, taught by a music professor, I heard the news that the president had been shot. So I took a little transistor radio, stuck the earphone in my ear, walked into the classroom, and the teacher greeted me as I walked in the door. And he looked at me and he said, I'm sorry, we don't allow transistor radios in our classroom. And I said, but the president's been shot. And he looked at me and he said, Kennedys come and go, but Bach lives on forever. For someone who held this man in such high regard, it was awful. I'm already tearful. I ignored his advice, carried the transistor radio into class, sat down, and 2 minutes later, the announcement came over that the president had died. Now I'm really gushing. The professor looks at me, he can tell what happened. He doesn't say anything. Packs up his papers, walks out of the classroom, and composes a requiem. Incredible experience. And the kernel of what has now developed for me in this journey to talk about how we work together across the aisle came from the moment 25 years later when I went to my class reunion, and I was met by a classmate, Ron Wallace, who was in that class. He's a poet, teaches poetry now at the University of Wisconsin. He said, you're in one of my books. I'll give you a copy. I want to read you this poem real quick. It's called Conspiracy Theory. The day that JFK was shot in Dallas, I was in Ohio, a Republican, almost 18, my father's voice still on my tongue. He hated JFK, and though I didn't know why, I thought that I must hate him too. And so when Ted Celeste burst in the classroom, his voice a sorrow brimming with the news, I leaned back in my seat and said one word. Good, I said. And all eyes turned on me, and then class was dismissed. And that one word, armed and dangerous, went out into the world as if I'd blessed the future with my scorn, which echoed back across the century like a lone assassin. Good, good, good. So same event, very different perception, and notice the language of the importance of words as how that came about. So that's that's really the genesis for where all this passion comes from me. And interestingly enough, being part of a political family, I was always on the other side of the campaign. I ran campaigns, started in 1972 in the McGovern campaign. I ran the Jimmy Carter campaign in Ohio. I ran my brother's campaigns. And it was very satisfying, but there was something that was still missing. And I decided that if the time came, that there'd be a time to run. And so the early 2000s, about 2004, our church was approached by Scott Peck, a gentleman who wrote The Road Less Traveled. And he was frustrated with the political process at the time, said the faith community needs to get involved in this and try to make a difference. They really need to get involved in having, reaching across the aisle and having a meaningful civil discourse. So I became a part of the beta group which developed this, and in my beta group was the then Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Tom Moyer. And Tom Moyer was a Republican, I was a Democrat. He had served in Governor Rhodes' administration before he was a Supreme Court Justice. So he was part of Rhodes' administration, who my brother had run against. He and I had a wonderful time developing and working on this program. Actually, what happened is that as a result of that, I decided to run for office if I could do it differently based on what we'd done and trying to work across the aisle. I won my race. I did it with a positive campaign. We went to serve, and I thought, well, this is going to be great. I can work across the aisle. First day in my caucus, they say, don't believe a word you hear from the people across the aisle. They're your enemy. Everything you say or do, they will hold against you. That was the first day. And again, this was not what I had wanted, not what I had expected, and I tried to do things a little differently, and while I was there, I was known for working across the aisle. But it really came home to me when now it's 2010, and we had gained control of the House, which I was a member of. And I was working on some legislation on dyslexia, not a very partisan issue. I asked the then minority leader of the House, Bill Batchelder, to be my lead co-sponsor. We developed the legislation. My caucus said, sorry, we won't let you introduce it. I said, why? They said, we have a very important election coming up in November, and we don't want the Republicans to look good. And I said, this is ridiculous. I tried to introduce it anyway, but because we were in charge, it never got done. Well, eventually what happened is we lost the election, so now we're in the minority again. Now it's Speaker Batchelder takes our legislature, comes to me, we've got to get our bill, your bill passed, and I'll make sure that we get you a good Republican on that bill to get it passed. That's the way it's supposed to happen. And that there's another germ then of the idea, how do you make these things happen? You got to get that sense of competition, that sense of partisanship out of there. And I heard this discussed a couple times in terms of how you do it. You have to change the culture. And so when I left the legislature, I decided I wanted to create a program that would work with state legislators to do just that, to change the culture where you could begin to have and build trust. As a matter of fact, our workshop that was mentioned earlier is called Building Trust Through Civil Discourse. That workshop was first done here in Cleveland in December of 2012, and it was done for the Council of State Governments, and it was so well received, And one of the Ohio legislators, Frank LaRose, who's going to be on the panel Wednesday, I think it is, came up and said, hey, all the Ohio legislators, let's try to do this in Ohio. So we approached the Council of State Governments. I had approached the National Institute for Civil Discourse whether they wouldn't want to team up with me. And it was just at the time that they had hired a new executive director, Carolyn Lukensmeyer. Carolyn saw it right away, said, our mission fits right in with what you're planning on doing. We were going to focus on Washington, but the reality is over 51% of folks who end up in Congress come from state houses. So if we can get to state houses, and it sounded like an earlier discussion, Stuart, that you were having about, okay, you start locally, go to state, then go nationally. Well, we want to get to the state legislators where the partisanship had started to seep in. And so we created this half-day workshop called Building Trust Through Civil Discourse. It was slow to start. When I would say to people, this is what I'm doing, and they'd say, and how's that going for you? And I would say, yeah, well, it's slow. And a number of the people on both sides of the aisle, Republicans or Democrats, would say, you know, our leadership doesn't want us to participate. They view it as problematic. So that was the first year. But then it started to catch on, and more people started to participate. So as of this point, we've done 17 workshops in 12 states, had over 400 legislators participate. The really exciting, unique thing is we have 42 legislators, Republicans and Democrats, and one independent, and several former legislators who have been trained to facilitate these workshops. So not only are they helpful in their own states with getting their states involved, but we've now trained them to go with us to other states to facilitate the workshops in other states. And it's been a really important part of what we do. And it really does make a difference. And so we're excited about that. As a result of our efforts, we've now created a national network of legislators who are committed to civil governance. And we have over 50 legislators who came to Seattle last August when we formed it. We're going to be back in Chicago in August to have another annual meeting. The two co-chairs, one is from Ohio, right here from Cleveland actually, Representative Stephanie House, a Democrat, and then Matt Pouliot, who's a Republican from Maine. So they co-chair that group, and it stays together. They share. We do online communications. We have live streaming of sessions talking about best practices and what's worked well in other states. And then most recently, and something that I don't know how much time I have here, but I want to focus on something else, which is something that's come up because of 2016. Because of this year's political climate and language and abuse of language and the violence that has come about from it, National Institute for Civil Discourse has started something called Revive Civility, #ReviveCivility. And actually, if you go to the NICD's website, nicd.arizona.edu/Revive Civility, you can see the whole program there. One of the key components of that program is their standards of conduct. I heard earlier the discussion, I can't remember who it was, who pointed out that everybody has a role in this. It begins with, I think it was Bill, it begins with you. Each one can and does make a difference by what they choose to do. So we're asking people, much the same as the group here that Stuart's got, asking people to make a pledge, and we're getting people signed up online for that standard of conduct. A second thing we're doing is a result of a program that had started in another area for the Institute. This one's called Text Talk Revive Civility. And this allows us to get young people involved. And literally, if you want to do it, you can wait until we're done. I'll give you the way to get it started, because there's a video, about a 4-minute video at the beginning of this platform that highlights the importance of what I'm going to raise, and that's unlikely friendships. If you talk about what you can do, you can identify someone who is outside your normal group that you would be meeting with, someone who you probably don't agree on many things with, and you reach out and say, let's have lunch, let's have coffee, let's get together, and the goal is not to change their mind. The goal is to get to know them. The goal is to have a personal conversation. And so if you want to see what that will look like, and you can look at it after this is over, what you'll do is text 89800. That's who you will text, 89800, with the word civility. And it will lead you to the video, and then an actual platform that'll work you through a discussion of this particular program that we've got going. As a result of this activity, we recently, the Institute recently held 2 convenings, or they're holding one for youth this week on mental health. They held one last week or week before last on anti-Muslim rhetoric going on and what we can do about it. And that texting platform is something that's been very much involved in the use of getting people involved. And finally, for those of you who think this is all a new discussion, I don't know whether anybody else has brought this up, but something that we like to hand out every now and then. It's called George Washington's Rules of Civility. His little red book, if you will. Rules of civility and decent behavior, and it's quite fun to read what was civil and what was decent back in those days. So I appreciate the fact that, Stuart, that you're doing this, that you've reached out at a time when things have gotten to the level that they are, and know that the National Institute for Civil Discourse is really committed to this whole process, to what you're doing and what others are doing, and John's groups and others. We are excited to be a participant and a partner in that effort, and thank you very much for including us in your program. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions if you have any questions. Do try out that texting. Yeah, John.
Just as a personal piece, I know Carolyn used to work for your father.
No, it's my brother.
Your brother.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
I want to thank Ted Celeste for joining us, and for everybody tuning in the live streaming, anyone who came out to see the speakers today and to listen to the panels. I think that some of the things that we learned today was that if we're going to effect civility, it has to be done at the cultural level, and that takes all of us. Everybody has to take a responsibility to stand for civility, and if you go onto our website, you could download our civility poster, which allows you to take a stand. If you are here based in Cleveland, you can come to the Purple Tent and you could get our civility sticker, I stand for civility. You can do the same in standing for civility by downloading the civility poster, I stand for civility, or another poster, what does civility look like? And I think we have a third poster that's going up with the 10 elements of having a civil conversation. How do you have a civil conversation? And very much appreciate the great work that the National Institute for Civil Discourse is doing. And it really takes every organization that is trying to impact how people treat one another in our country. It takes government, it takes educators, and it takes each of us to create a different level of civility in our country and see our commonalities, see our common ground, see our shared values. And that is going to take each of us having a simple conversation. It may be with our neighbor, it may be in our children's school, it may be in our place of worship, it may be in our business, wherever we're working, but each of us can take the simple step, number one, of saying, I stand for civility. Number two, have a civil conversation with somebody, either on a one-on-one basis or sponsor some kind of civil dialogue where you talk about values and issues in the workplace. And we hope that we've given you an example through these panels of how to do it. Thanks everyone for attending, for watching, and we hope to see you again tomorrow.